Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. So we just finished our Let's Play of Jedi Fallen Order. One of the coolest settings in the game is the planet of Bracca, a mid-rim world which ended up being the graveyard for all sorts of Clone Wars materials from both the Republic Navy and the Separatist Navy. We saw everything from long lines of clone trooper helmets, discarded B-1 battle droids, rusted AT-RTs, LAAT gunships, and even an ETA-2 Actis Jedi Interceptor, most likely shot down during the events of Order 66. Then there were larger ships like the Lucre Hulk battleship and of course the beloved Venator Class Star Destroyer. Bracca used to be a shipbuilding world. Not as famous or industrious as Corellia, Fondor, and Kuat, but still a planet full of capable engineers, ship designers, and heavy industry. Now, few skilled laborers are left on Bracca, and the ones that remained have joined the Scrappers Guild and now are making a living, scavenging the ships they once built.
Yeah, here we are scrapping these ships from the war just so they can turn around and make new ones. What a racket, huh?
And he kind of has a point here. It doesn't make any sense for the Empire to just scrap all of these ships. This scene takes place only 5 years after the end of the Clone Wars and the rise of the Empire. Why would Emperor Palpatine decide to get rid of this very capable Star Destroyer that served as the backbone of the Republic Navy? Now, as a fan of the prequels, you're most likely screaming at the screen right now and demanding to know why exactly your hard-earned tax dollars are so blatantly being wasted right now. And as a citizen of the Empire, it's your duty to really contact your local MOF and send a complaint. Just make sure you also include your ID number, your home address, the address that you work at, and also your spouse's work address, along with the address of your child or children, along with the address of the dog park you usually walk your dog in, because the Empire really wants to know where you are so they can better serve you. The Venator Class Star Destroyer was designed and constructed in a hurry. It wasn't even available for the first battle of Geonosis. The Republic basically had to launch a massive fleet of starfighters ahead of the invasion to make sure the acclimator assault ships weren't destroyed in orbit. So that means the Venator Class Star Destroyer was active from 22 BBY to 14 BBY, where most of them were decommissioned. This gives the Star Destroyer at best an 8 years service period, which is kind of insane for such a large ship. I mean, the closest comparison we have here on Earth would be probably an aircraft carrier. If we look at something like the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, it's been serving in the US Navy since 1975. That's more than 42 years of service, or 52 metric years of service. Now, there is a new class of aircraft carrier being developed by the Navy, but for the most part, the Nimitz has stayed competitive thanks to many refits and systems upgrades. And that's because the research and development of something as massive as an aircraft carrier or a Star Destroyer is ridiculous and can take many years, if not decades, to complete. It also costs billions of dollars or galactic credits as well, which is why ships like the Nimitz are designed with technology for the future, along with options to continuously upgrade and improve the ship's frame. Now, we're not exactly sure when the Venator Class Star Destroyer started its development cycle, but it's most likely around the same time as when Darth Sidious and Darth Plagueis started the Clone Army. Plagueis most likely hired Quat Drive Yards to start the project through his financial management firm, Damask Holdings. Quat Drive Yards then probably shifted the project over to its secretive subsidiary, Rathana Heavy Engineering. This all happened at least a decade before the Clone Wars even started. To make matters even more difficult, the Ruusan Reformation had completely eliminated the demand for massive capital ships or carriers. Only a few planets were large enough to buy such ships for their planetary defense forces. So all of the technology on the Venator, from its unique hangar doors to its massive main reactor, had to be more or less designed from scratch. This ain't no Imperial Class Star Destroyer Mark I to Mark II transition. Are you big enough of a Star Wars nerd to spot the difference? So if you put this all together, you have a ship that costs a massive amount of credits to research and develop, and was in service shorter than the R&D process itself. And instead of modifying the Venator Class Star Destroyer, sometime shortly after the rise of the Empire, they just started mothballing them and ripping them apart for scrap. Which is insane, but then again, the Galactic Empire wasn't always known as a very practical organization. Beneath the shiny uniforms and massive starships lay an underlying ideology fraught with irrational fear, superstition, and witchcraft. So there is one reason why you wouldn't want to refit a relatively new starship, and that's if you fundamentally disagree with its core design features and they can't be fixed with some bolt-on add-ons. The Venator Class Star Destroyer was massive at over 1 kilometer in length, but it wasn't really a Star Destroyer in my opinion. For one, it lacked the heavy power you would see on some later Star Destroyers like the Imperial class. The Venator only had around 8 to 10 turbolaser emplacements. Even during the Clone Wars, it was oftentimes outgunned by much smaller Separatist ships. This is probably due to the fact that the majority of the ship's hull served as a massive hangar for up to 500 starfighters, transports, and gunships. This is why the Venator should really be classified as a carrier rather than a Star Destroyer. It clearly depends more on its complement of fighters for defensive and offensive power rather than its shields and turbolasers. As a matter of fact, at close ranges, not only was the Venator class outgunned, its unique central hangar door, which ran along the entire length of the ship, served as a serious structural weakness. The Venator Class Star Destroyer's entire strategy relied on it being able to release its starfighters quickly and attack enemy ships before they came into range. A Venator Class Star Destroyer could easily take on 5 or 6 munificent star frigates from a really long range, but up close, it would really struggle. In my opinion, the carrier-based fleet with long-range snub fighters is a much more flexible and versatile force than a traditional battleship-based fleet that depends on line-of-sight engagements. It's also a lot cheaper to just write off a few starfighters rather than exposing your massive ships to enemy fire. But if your mind is set on creating a massive Star Destroyer fleet with dozens of turbolaser banks, I understand why the Venator Class Star Destroyer would be unsuitable for your purposes. The Venator Class Star Destroyer had a brittle structure, and that would serve as a poor platform for a battleship. Its power plant was too weak to power the amount of turbolasers the Empire wanted on their mainline ships. The ship's sleek dagger shape maximized surface area and not necessarily interior space, and the Empire wanted a sledgehammer to instill fear into its populace, not a fine dagger used to surgically strike at opponents from afar. By 5 BBY, Palpatine had gained control of the entire Galactic Senate along with the Imperial military. Despite protests from his own military leaders, Palpatine went through with his decision to get rid of the Venator. And it wasn't just about practicality for Palpatine. The Venator Class Star Destroyer during its short service in the Clone Wars had become a symbol of the Republic, and more importantly, the Jedi. As a matter of fact, a lot of people called the Venator Class Star Destroyer by its nickname, the Jedi Cruiser. At the time, they were the preferred command ship for the Jedi, and also used as almost personal ships by more famous generals like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine was obsessed with not only destroying the Jedi Order, but any trace of their existence, and that included Jedi temples, Jedi holodramas, lightsabers, and of course a ship nicknamed the Jedi Cruiser. Because even after they removed the Venator's red stripe and painted it gray, people still recognized what it was. When Palpatine adopted the Tarkin Doctrine, it perfectly summed up exactly what he wanted the Empire to be. Instead of dealing with dissidents and trying to fix every problem in the galaxy, Palpatine wanted obedience from his people. Obedience won through the threat of destruction. Ships like the Imperial Class Star Destroyer was designed to just do that. The wedge-shaped ship had been used on numerous occasions to bombard planets and turn their surfaces into glass. The sight of one of these mile-long vessels over a planet was oftentimes enough to quell any kind of dissent. Then there was also the Imperial mentality when it came to pilots. During the height of the Clone Wars, the Grand Army of the Republic introduced the ARC-170 Starfighter. On paper, it looked like an extremely well-rounded, high-performance fighter, but in reality, the 3-man Starfighter was way too slow, bulky, and not maneuverable enough to survive a dogfight. During the Battle of Coruscant, the expensive ARC-170 performed extremely poorly against the unmanned Vulture droids, which were many times cheaper to construct and maintain and also required no training. Smaller fighters like the V-19 platform performed a lot better, and this is where we saw the Republic start transitioning towards lighter and smaller fighters. With the fall of the Republic, Palpatine also disbanded the clone troopers along with the clone pilots. With a massive amount of manpower available in the form of citizens and displaced war refugees, Palpatine focused on building a new Starfighter Corps with non-clones. This was a much cheaper alternative, and the same mentality was used when it came to the construction and design of their new ships. The TIE Fighter was pretty bare bones compared to even the most simple Republic-era ship, and because of its short range and lack of firepower, they served more as defensive interceptors rather than assault starfighters. The TIE Fighter makes more sense when it's deployed on a ship like the Imperial Class Star Destroyer, which relied more on its turbolasers for offensive firepower. A ship like the Venator would require a more capable starfighter than just a TIE Fighter. And one could argue that the Venator Class Star Destroyer with its massive amount of starfighters was also more expensive to run and maintain. And for the Empire, cost was still a very important thing. Lastly, when Palpatine took over, he nationalized several major industries. He also quickly shrunk the job markets on a lot of planets. This meant that on many worlds, you either worked for the Empire or you struggled to make ends meet. When central governments take over industries usually run by private citizens or private corporations, they usually also become responsible for providing jobs and maintaining those jobs. And while it doesn't make sense from a business standpoint to destroy perfectly good ships, from a political point of view, it's fine to waste those ships because it provides employment opportunities, which lowers dissent. So there you have it, guys. Those are some of the reasons why Emperor Palpatine ultimately abandoned the very well-designed Venator Class Star Destroyer for the Imperial Class Star Destroyer. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.